Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to CIRA's last virtual meetup of the year. I cannot believe I'm saying those words. I don't know about you guys, but I am certainly not ready for it to be December yet, but here we are. Today, we'll be delving into internet access and performance in Canada. My name is Tanya O'Callaghan. I'm the Vice President of Community Investment Policy and Advocacy here at CIRA. And today we're going to explore what are the factors that can affect your internet performance, and we will share some practical tips on how you can improve your own internet speed at home and in your business and contribute to the broader improvements to Canada's internet. CIRA has a great deal of pride in really playing a key role in bridging Canada's digital divide in a number of ways through our community investment program. So that is the program through which we give back to Canada's internet through a number of initiatives. One of the best known ones is our CIRA grants program, which contributes about $1.25 million every year to organizations across the country that are looking to solve internet connectivity and security challenges, as well as improving Canada's digital policy landscape. And then we also run direct programs that help strengthen Canada's internet community. And one of those you will hear lots about today. That is our CIRA Internet Performance Test, or IPT. I promise that might be the only acronym, or I will try to make it the only acronym I'll use today. The Internet Performance Test has helped governments and researchers identify internet service gaps that persist across Canada. And as I said, we'll be diving into that today. So before I introduce today's panel, I do want to note that today's session will be taking place in English only. I've already seen one question pop up asking whether this session will be recorded, and the answer is yes. So Diane, you can, if you have to come and go, rest assured we are recording the session, and it will be uploaded to CIRA's YouTube channel in the coming days. I also want to acknowledge that our offices, which are based in Ottawa, are located on the traditional, unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. CIRA honors all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples, and their valuable past and present contributions to this land. Now, before we get underway, I want to start off with asking everyone one question, everyone who's tuned in, and you should see it pop up on your screens. Are you happy with your internet quality and the price you pay for it? And that's actually the question that our panel will be helping us explore today. So we've gathered an expert panel of industry stakeholders who will share their insights on this very question. I'll start by introducing Andy Kaplan-Myrth, who is the VP of Regulatory and Carrier Affairs at TechSavvy. TechSavvy is an independent Canadian broadband, internet, TV, and voice services provider. Andy's a lawyer here in Ottawa with technical experience and an interest in areas of law and policy that include telecom, the internet, copyright, cyber law, and privacy. So welcome, Andy.
Thank you very much.
Next is Hosein Badran, who is the Senior Director of Internet Growth and Trust at the Internet Society, which is a global nonprofit that empowers people to keep the internet a force for good. There, Hosein leads technical, policy, and advocacy initiatives on internet access, infrastructure, and trust domains for the Internet Society. So welcome, Hosein.
Thank you for having me.
And last but not least, my colleague from CIRA, Jeff Buell, who is CIRA's Internet Performance Test Program Manager. CIRA's IPT is considered the most advanced internet quality test in Canada, and it provides public access to internet performance results. Jeff is an avid advocate for how to use IPT data with maps and reports to help stakeholders identify areas coast to coast with limited access, to help improve funding decisions and evaluate the success of funded projects through broadband funding, and to do so with a high degree of geographic granularity. And he'll get into some details today about the internet performance test. Before we get underway, I will make a shameless plug. Throughout this session, and certainly after this session, don't forget to take a minute and go run an internet performance test and test your own internet quality at performance.cira.ca. So now that I got that out of the way, welcome to our panelists. For our viewers, we do want to hear your questions, so I'll kick things off with a few questions that we have for the panelists, but we definitely want to make sure that that those who are tuning in have an opportunity to ask your questions. So you should see a little question window that's to the right of the video player. Type your questions in there and click submit. As well, we're going to be tackling questions, and this is a popularity contest, so we are going to be tackling questions by order of popularity and interest in each of the questions. So you can go in and upvote questions that that you like and that you want to make sure that we answer. And then if you do, you can also use the chat function to chat amongst yourselves, or if you have any sort of more technical questions about how the webcast about the webcast itself. Oh, and I see that URL for the performance test. I'll repeat it throughout. Don't worry, but it is for performance.cira.ca. All right. Well, maybe Jeff, because you're my colleague, I'll pick on you to kick things off a little bit. Could you help kick us off by painting a picture of what we are seeing in terms of what's the state of connectivity in Canada, the good, but maybe also, unfortunately, the less good of what you see.
Thanks, Tanya. Yeah, and I'd be happy to. So I think most people are probably familiar with running an internet speed test. Maybe some people have run our internet performance test. So like others, it takes about 30 seconds to run. And once you complete it, the test taker gets the results on key internet performance metrics. But also those results, we collect them, we anonymize them, and combine them with other tests to contribute to statistics, insights on internet performance, regionally and as well as across the country. Our test does a really good job of identifying exactly where the test is coming from. So that way we can aggregate the data and report on it on a bunch of different geographic levels. So we can look at variations of internet performance within a community, like within neighborhoods, between communities, also larger regions like provinces, etc. Also, because of that geographic precision, we can determine if the test comes from a rural area or an urban area. So I think it's fairly well known that rural areas have considerably more challenges when it comes to accessing affordable quality internet services. But even though that is a fairly well known fact, that there is a rural and urban gap in services, there really isn't a ton of Canadian data that helps quantify that gap, especially data that comes from kind of the lived consumer experience, except for the data that comes from the IPT. So if you're anything like me, I like to hear the bad news first, and you asked for it, Tanya. One thing is rural median speeds today, so in 2022, they're close to the equivalent of urban download speeds in 2018. So I guess one way you could interpret that is rural networks are about 4 years behind urban networks in terms of delivering capacities and speed to their customers. Another bit of bad news is that even though there is an awareness of the importance of upload speeds now with our services, certainly that came about during COVID, when people were working and going to school from home, attending classes, etc., using video conferencing applications. So even though we recognize the need for better upload speeds, we're just not seeing that in the test results, specifically in rural areas. So early pandemic, early 2020 numbers, the median rural upload speed was 1 megabit per second. Now, late 2022, we're only at about just under 3 megabits per second. So that's the bad news. So the good news is that, just generally speaking, when we look at the trend of both download and upload speeds over time, we do see things are moving in the right directions. Things are improving. So overall, there's been nearly a tripling in median download speeds in rural connections since the beginning of the pandemic. So that's a significant bright spot. So median download speeds in rural communities increased from under 8 megabits per second to just over 23 megabits per second during that 2-year period. Another bright spot, in the first quarter of 2021, the median urban download speed exceeded the universal service objective of 50 megabits per second down for the first time. So I'm sure we'll be talking about the universal service objective in a second. So if I were to show you a chart, if there would be a chart on the screen, what you'd see is the trend lines are moving in the right direction in terms of median upload and download speeds, both in urban and rural communities. But what's happening is in rural communities or rural tests, that trend line's just a little bit flatter. So just one more piece of information. So this year in 2022, the median urban download speed is 83 megabits per second. The median urban upload speed is 14 megabits per second, and that's about 4 times faster than rural speeds.
Thanks, Jeff. That definitely, I think, helps paint the picture and set the tone for this conversation. And thanks also for including, that's why I wanted to make sure we included not just the bad news, but also some little bit of good news, because those who work with me have heard me say this before, but I sometimes say that Canada's second national sport is to hate on our ISPs. And so that's really not what we're trying to do today. I think this is a complex issue we're trying to dig into, and there are some valid challenges, but also a little bit of good news. So, Andy, I think I'll kind of hand the floor to you next, because the next question is, so Jeff's talked about the progress we're seeing. Do you think Canada has the proper infrastructure in place to ensure that we continue on that trend line, that we can make sure everyone gains that performing, reliable internet access across the country?
I think that we don't right now, but like certainly a lot of work has gone into improving networks, building more networks. A lot of money has gone into funding builds across the country, and that's critical to keep us moving in that direction, getting more people connected. There are lots of different funding programs that have created some challenges for especially smaller providers, I would say, to access those funds and build those networks. But at the same time, if we're just looking at getting people connected, I think there clearly has been progress there. The focus needs to be, and I think largely has been, on fiber as the gold standard, the technology to get people connected, and that's certainly been good as well. But this is a very large country with a lot of remote territory, and that does not have fiber, is not likely to have fiber soon, and some of that's covered by other technologies that may struggle right now to reach those speeds or get enough people connected.
Thank you. Hosein, you watch these developments very closely as a little bit of an expert outsider. What's your take on this? Where are we and what's missing?
Yes, I tend to agree with Jeff and Andy. There is progress being done in connecting the unconnected in Canada, but reaching out to remote communities, some Indigenous communities, and in urban areas there are some efforts going on. But I think the pandemic has shown us the wide digital divide that exists even in urban communities. We've seen in big cities like in Toronto, downtown Toronto, parts of downtown Toronto are quite, tenants are quite struggling with finding affordable connectivity that meets their minimum needs. Cities have embarked on trying to make access to public infrastructure and to build public-private partnerships to provide access to underserved areas within urban surroundings. So there is work being done, but I think some more concentrated effort needs to take place to avoid bottlenecks, to avoid anti-competitive practices, and make sure that access is provided when without too many constraints, in having flexibility and choice of access to communities. I agree that fiber certainly is the investment, right investment in terms of connectivity, and should be reached out to rural and indigenous communities wherever it is feasibly possible. In the meantime, other technologies I think should also be taken advantage of. I think we'll talk about these further, like low Earth satellites, but also making spectrum available for communities to reach out over wireless technologies in areas where other means are more expensive.
Thank you. And I'm going to break with my own script here a little bit, but there's a question in the Slido from Mike that I think is just very germane to what we're talking about here. His question says, having every Canadian with internet access is more important than faster internet for existing users. So my first question, I guess, to you is, do you believe that? True or false, I guess. And should government be lobbied to charge an internet fee for use towards remote infrastructure? So I don't know who wants to take that, but it was just so bang on to what we were talking about.
I can try to. There's a couple of different things in there. So I don't know that there's really a trade-off between getting more people connected and upgrading speeds for existing users. Speeds for existing users might be limited by old technology, but it might be limited by kind of the backhaul that's available in a community or other factors. So these are often plans to connect communities that depend on lots of different factors. And, you know, maybe we can put more emphasis into connecting more communities than upgrading existing networks. But I think I would argue that that's where the emphasis has been. You know, broadband funding programs are all about connecting unconnected communities or communities that don't have target speeds. Government lobbied to charge an internet fee for use towards remote infrastructure. I think it's right that governments pay to connect communities. I think that is a public good, and it's an important thing for governments to contribute to. That money right now comes from taxes, it comes from the government, and part of it is often funded by the companies themselves. And part of it is often funded by if it's a CRTC program, then it comes from telecommunications fees as well. So the money comes from different buckets. You know, I think there is already kind of a balance of where that money comes from. That, to me, isn't where the real barriers are. The real barriers are in our experience has been how slowly these funding programs have worked. And to give you an example, there are many overlapping funding programs, but the federal government launched a broadband fund last year that had two streams, one stream for kind of large projects that you would expect to take time to sort out those applications and award contracts. And it had another stream that was the rapid response stream that was specifically designed to fund small shovel-ready projects and get, you know, a community connected. So we had applied for a number of those rapid response stream projects. We had communities where we could connect a few thousand customers who had no internet service right now. We were ready to go and could get people connected in a matter of months. That project, I do not know what bogged it down, but I had very high hopes for it. I think that's an excellent model for the government to fund projects. It's lower risk, and it has faster results. Basically didn't go anywhere. I think a small number of those projects were given out. I will tell you that we never heard back about our projects, and as a result, those areas are kind of overtaken by other funding projects that are bigger projects and take longer. So a lot, you know, for at least some of these, I would say bureaucracy got in the way, and it's not a matter of the money, it's a matter of getting it out the door into the right hands.
Yeah, sorry, just to pick up on something Andy said, it speaks to how large the problem is and how competitive it is for ISPs and other projects trying to access these funds. I think governments have been fairly serious in their spending, especially since COVID. It's really cemented the need. I just think the scope of the problem is so large that there's so many projects, probably very valid projects, like Andy's mentioned, that just go somewhat unnoticed and untouched, and then the problem just is exacerbated.
Great, thank you. So we've been talking a lot about access, but at the start of this session, I asked this question about everyone, all the participants, whether you are happy with your internet package, and with the speeds and what you're getting for what you pay for. So I just want to close the loop on that. We have the survey results, and despite what I said earlier about this hating on ISPs being a national pastime, 35% of people said they're happy. So I'm happy to see that result. Half, mind you, said they're not. So so there we have it. Pardon me. But that does, that does transition a little bit to some questions about performance, because having internet is one thing, having good performing internet is a whole other. So we do often hear complaints about people who are just not getting the performance that they think they should. So Hosein, maybe I'll pick on you. You're an engineer, so maybe you can talk to us about some of the factors that can affect internet performance.
Yes, sure. When, of course, accessing the internet, of course, one aspect is the type of technology that one uses to access the internet, and the last mile that one has coming to the home or to the enterprise. There are technologies which are better than others. Fiber is the top technology, and then you go down DSL and copper and so on. Of course, and inside the home, the house or the enterprise, also the technology that's utilized makes a difference. Are you connecting over an Ethernet cable or connecting over the wireless domain? Each of them, Ethernet, of course, is certainly better. Wireless has its reach, but it's also its performance limitations. So these factors need to be taken into consideration. The other point is one should the access to the internet ultimately is a shared medium. So the internet is a shared medium and is impacted by how many people are accessing at the same time, in the same location, the same house, or in the same neighborhood, and that's how ultimately the service provider aggregates the traffic. So this aggregation itself has an impact on the performance that users ultimately see. So we can say there's a certain bandwidth that one has subscribed to as in terms of the package, but actually this is a nominal value. And what one gets instantaneously is what one can see through the measurement, keeping in mind access that this is ultimately a shared medium that one is subscribing to. And there are ways that one can improve the performance on a technology basis, from an access point of view, from a kind of service, kind of package one is subscribed to, but ultimately there are external constraints that need to be taken into consideration.
Thanks, Hosein. Yeah, and I think this is a constant whenever we talk about the internet performance, internet resilience, is that there's a bit of shared responsibility from along that network. Everyone who uses it and touches it has a bit of responsibility to ensure it's working at peak performance. So, Andy, I suspect you probably have some experience on what are the different things that affect the network and what people can do about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we talk about internet speed and internet performance, as an end user, as a customer of an ISP, you have your experience, and that's what I think you're right to kind of respond to. Something's wrong with your internet performance. And, so you might complain or you might live with it or whatever. But yeah, there are lots of different factors that can play into this. So one interesting thing, I guess, about ISP like TechSavvy is that because we are, TechSavvy has a fiber to the home network that we are building, have built and serve many customers in Southwestern Ontario. That's our own network. But across the country, we serve most of our customers using the last mile of big incumbents. And so we do DSL, where we buy service from telcos, and we also do cable services. And customers maybe know when they buy the service what they're getting, but over time, you just have the service that you get, and you have the speed that you get, and you don't worry too much about the particular technology. So each of those technologies has different characteristics when it comes to speeds and how it might, and performance, and how it responds to, the weather or the, customers in your neighborhood. I guess I'll say, in terms of sharing the network, there are a small, for the most part, we provision enough capacity on our network to carry all of the traffic that our customers generate. We don't throttle our users in order to, protect network capacity or something in general, except in, very extreme circumstances. Carriers, the large carriers who build these networks, I'm talking about Bell and Rogers and Videotron and others, they do. I think they all have published information about this now, that they throttle the very heaviest users. And that's generally the very heaviest uploading users. And we're talking about terabytes of data in a month. So this is really the very, very top. And that's one way that ISPs address traffic issues in order to protect the network for, the greater community. That kind of thing does happen, but I think it happens less than people might remember if you are thinking about kind of Napster or BitTorrent kind of days and the kind of throttling that used to happen then.
Thanks, Andy. I have a quick follow-up on something you just said. So you were talking about the different technologies that might deliver internet to people's homes. And, if I can extrapolate from something you said, I think people don't always understand what technology they have, what the packages that they have, and what that technology means. Do you think there's a need to better, the internet is so central to our lives. Do you think there's a need for people to just to up that level of internet literacy so people better are just more literate and informed about that?
That may be helpful for people to learn more. I guess I kind of feel like we've been at this a long time at this point. And, people I think learn what they need to learn. They get the expertise that they need to get. If we haven't kind of gotten that to them now, I think, I'm not sure that how much energy if that's worth spending on. I think also the more we're moving toward fiber to the home, the less important that's going to be. This tends to be, if it's real fiber to the home, it is very reliable. It generally provides speeds and performance very reliably. And so we in theory should start getting away from these kinds of, questions about it's peak time in my neighborhood and the whole network is slowed down, or it's a rainy day and the box is, underwater somewhere. I think fiber hopefully will move us away from that more and more. And then of course there's challenges that I can't leave it go unmentioned, but challenges with independent competitors getting access to fiber to the home networks. That's a real problem right now. It's basically monopoly services from, Bell, essentially.
I think you'll like some of the questions that seem to be popping up down the list, because I suspect we'll come back to some of those issues. Maybe I'll toss the next question to either Hosein or Jeff. We keep talking about speed and people saying it's not fast enough. What is enough? Are there minimum speeds? Are there speeds that people, quote unquote, should be aiming for?
I can take a stab at that if it's okay. So I don't think there's really a minimum speed per se. I think it's a bit of a subjective thing. Like I live in a rural area myself, so up until about 2 years ago, I had an extremely limited DSL service that delivered about a megabit per second down and up, which to me today is absolutely bonkers. But at the time, that's pretty much what we had without investing quite a bit out of my own pocket for a customer and tower. So I think when they say it isn't enough. I think what they're really referring to is it's just not meeting their needs, or it's consistently delivering under what their contract from their ISP says. So I really think like choosing, I think people probably understand this, but choosing an internet package is almost like choosing a vehicle. Like a family of 5 isn't likely going to select a 2-seat sports car, or a single person isn't going to select a minivan on the other side. So that's the kind of rationale that people need to apply when they're looking and shopping for internet services. And I mean, of course, that depends on what options the person has. And to your previous question, and like what Andy was saying is, I think it depends. There's quite a variation in consumers' knowledge about internet services that are available. Like I find somebody that might live in an urban community where there's tons of options, they don't really know. They're just shopping for the best value. But somebody that lives in an area that with limited options, they're going to look at the details and look at exactly what's available to them. So if I didn't make the point already, this CRTC universal service objective. So what they're saying is that they hope every Canadian by 2026 has affordable access to an internet service that delivers 50 megabits per second down and 10 megabits per second up. So I would say that that's not a magic number. And I think that probably meets a lot of people's needs, but to others, it may not meet their needs. Again, back to that analogy of picking a vehicle, depending on what your needs are. There is some research and evidence, obviously, behind it that 50 by 10 supports most things that people do online in terms of accessing apps and content.
Thanks.
I can just add to this. I think the 50-50-10 as set by the CRT, certainly a target for as a Canada-wide target. But looking at other experiences of deployment globally in Europe and other Asia Pacific and other places of the developed world, we see that 1 gigabit now 1 gigabit per second service, it becomes becoming the norm in many places. And provided that we are moving to fiber to the home, as Andy was just mentioning, that should be a feasible goal to aim for. And if it has to be rolled out in a phased fashion, I think that should be more favorable than just limiting it to 50-50-10. So I think we should be more ambitious in trying to offer Canadians more performance, more capability, along with better access from in urban communities, and moving this as much as possible to rural and indigenous communities.
Great, thanks. Andy, any final thoughts on this question?
No, I mean, I agree with Jeff and Hosein. The CRTC, announced that they had hit this 50-10 or hit their targets for how many people are connected, and hit those targets early. And I guess I just thought those just weren't ambitious enough targets. I mean, it probably wasn't ambitious enough at the time, and certainly now I think 50 just doesn't seem like enough to be a goal, mission accomplished.
Great. And I guess I'll just add, and feel free to jump in here, but we talked about the 50-10 part of the target, but I think another important element of those CRTC service objectives is actually that there's also a quality metric, and the CRTC looks at latency and things like that. So it's not just the speed, but also that actual experience of what internet users are feeling and living when they're online. So I want to cut to a couple of the questions. I'm going to grab two kind of as a twofer question, because Dave asked, is it law that internet must be provided to rural areas? And I want to pair that to, and how can we better complain to our ISPs about improving the internet speeds in rural areas? So I don't know who wants to jump on both of those first. That first one I asked is kind of probably a simpler one to start with.
I mean, I'll take a crack. I don't think that it is law. I think that there's a there is a broad understanding that we need to get people connected. And I think that governments have been working hard to find ways to do that. But, you know, if you're in a rural area and you aren't connected yet, I don't think there's some legal recourse that you can take. The second part of that for complaints, look, I think, you know, if you're talking about you're in a rural area, you have a provider and your speeds aren't up to what they should be, then, you know, I think you can try to work it out with your provider. And ultimately, there's also the CCTS, which is a complaints body and an ombuds body, independent body that can help customers, you know, resolve performance kind of complaints with their service provider, although generally only if you're, you know, not just my speed isn't fast enough, but something where your provider has, you know, really not upheld their end of the bargain type of thing.
Jeff, do you want to talk a little bit about what folks have done using the internet performance test in that regard, either individuals or community-wide?
Yeah, I was just going to, how I would answer that question about how to more effectively complain. I think the first step would be having the conversation, and I think you'd be surprised at how many people think that they don't have a voice or that there isn't something that can be done, where we've seen certainly situations that things can improve. How to more effectively complain, and I don't want to use the word complain, but lack of a better term, I would say have evidence. And one of the best ways to do that is to run tests, like from the IPT. In fact, with the IPT, you can sign up for an account and you can do things like run automated tests that run in the background that will create a log where you can see if there's peaks and valleys, if there's situations where there's time of day bottlenecks. So all that kind of that evidence that you can use to bring to the table to have the discussion with the ISP to see if there's anything that can be done. And of course, you know, there might be other options, there might be other packages available, or there might be other ISPs that are delivering services on other platforms. So that's how I would answer that question.
Hosein, do you want to jump in?
Yes, thank you. My comment regards the first part of the question, if it's mandatory, if it's law to connect rural areas. And I think the pandemic has shown really the impact of being underserved or not connected at all to the internet on people's lives and on their livelihood and employment, on health, on education of their children. So it's becoming really a human necessity to be connected to the internet. And this is what the United Nations or the ITU has regarded. So connecting those who are underserved areas is becoming fundamentally critical for their livelihood. And if the business case for an operator does not exist to connect a small community in a rural area, the government certainly has to intervene to make whatever is required to have this connectivity done and have it improved over time. On whatever means is possible. If fiber is too expensive, then satellite or microwave, there are options for connectivity, but getting people connected is certainly a mandatory thing. Civil society has a role to play, and we as the Internet Society one of our key priorities is connecting the unconnected. So work with communities to bring them knowledge, bring them equipment, and facilitate their connectivity to the public internet on a global basis, including in Canada with Indigenous communities. So this is a fundamental human right that needs to be looked at from this perspective. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So the next question from our members, it's getting a little bit of support, is, well, I guess it's less of a question than a statement, but our internet speed is fine, although some in rural areas might contest that, but it costs a lot. Who wants to tackle that one? I see Hosein nodding, so maybe I'll toss it over to you to start.
Yes, from my experience, having lived in multiple countries, certainly the rate of connectivity and services in Canada is quite high. So the high end of the spectrum compared to other places. There are places that are services cost less. So this is some area where hopefully some improvement can take place, given as we just said, that it's becoming a fundamental component of people's lives to be connected. So any approach to try to lower costs is, I think, would be welcomed by the consumer community.
Yeah, absolutely. And just again, from a rural perspective, like that's one of the main challenges is that, you know, people that do have adequate speeds in rural communities tend to pay just a little bit higher per bit of data than those in urban communities. The other challenge, of course, is that there may be more economical platforms that deliver high-speed connections. But there's limitations in terms of how much bandwidth can be delivered. So technologies like unlicensed fixed wireless or stationary orbit satellite. And then the other challenge is there's infrastructure that's nearly obsolete. So it's old copper networks that were built 50 years ago to deliver a totally different service in analog telephone that's been adapted to deliver broadband, and those networks are essentially being abandoned.
I mean, I think I want to talk about competition and try not to use like all the time that's available here, because I really could. I think that's a huge part of the problem here. It is not a coincidence that Canada has both some of the highest costs and increasing, and some, you know, one of the worst situations around competition for internet services to homes. You know, TechSavvy is a wholesale-based provider. Our model largely is to buy last mile services from large carriers and use those last mile services to create our own internet services that we sell to customers. We're not a reseller, but the cost of that last mile infrastructure has increased and been the subject of regulatory disputes for a decade now that has basically been unaddressed completely by the CRTC. You know, ultimately, it has gone back and forth. At the same time, there is no competition at all on the newest networks. Fiber to the home is subject to a whole new regulatory framework that has never been finalized and nobody has used. And, you know, what we've seen is basically a breakdown in the competitive frameworks, prices going up, and some providers who are, you know, TechSavvy's competitors, independent competitive providers, have in the last year been bought by those large providers. So there's, you know, industry consolidation at the same time. This is a product of a lack of competition.
Thanks. I figured I should have known you were going to want to weigh in on that question, Andy.
Try to keep it as brief as I can, but really, there's a lot there.
So David's question, I think, is a great follow-up here. So his question says, are alternative models being considered, such as municipal broadband networks where ISPs compete to provide service over municipally owned networks, like the AMEN model, which I'm not familiar with, because, as he says, throwing money at ISPs to build out rural access doesn't seem to work. Hosein's nodding, so maybe I'll start with you.
Thank you so much. And to that particular question, it is left to each municipality to take the lead on what they want to do for their communities. In the Toronto or the GTA, the municipality did this approach and tried to build a public-private partnership to open available fiber ducts for new services and new operators that could provide services to areas that are underserved, given the divide that was quite obvious during the pandemic. But this is not happening across the country. It's every municipality is taking this in its own hand and taking the lead. Maybe something along more proactively should be designed to make this really attractive for municipalities to take this approach. I wanted to add to the point that we were just discussing regarding competition, if I may. Competition is important to enhance access and enhance performance, but also it is very critical for the resiliency of the infrastructure, for resiliency of the internet. And having multiple carriers at each network layer is quite important. As we have just heard, that there is lack of competition particularly at the transit area. Two large providers will dominate the market. Certainly, this is not a way to build a transit national infrastructure. Multiple players have to be licensed, have to be able to work and build infrastructure, so that the service operators have a choice to choose multiple transit operators in order to avoid a single point of failure in their connectivity. And what we have seen from the Rogers outage that happened recently is just a very strong wake-up call in that domain. The testimonial that really the web networks, the way they have been built, driven essentially only by commercial interest, has not been serving the Canadian public. And single points of failure are present in the current infrastructure, and they propagate throughout different services, because mobile services from some operators are relying on other transit operators who have single points of failure. And if you have even worse situation where you have a package at home, that you have the home access along with the mobile access as part of one bundle from a single operator, certainly you have this kind of vulnerability in place. So competition is really very critical. The role of the CRTC is to really enhance and facilitate competition for the health of the telecom sector in Canada. And unfortunately, and I agree with Andy wholeheartedly, that over the last 2 decades, this was not the priority of the CRTC, nor was it the priority of the Canadian government. So I hope this has to be changed. And we should take what happened with the Rogers situation as I mentioned, as a wake-up call, and really a fork in the direction we have been going so far.
Yeah, thanks for opening that door and raising the issue of resiliency and enough redundancy for resiliency, because I think that is an issue. The Rogers outage, what happened post Fiona, what we saw last year with the landslides in BC, with climate change, and with this new dependence, or this increased dependence on the internet for absolutely everything now. I think that is an issue that's just become intrinsically tied to this, and it'll be interesting to see. The government's looking for recommendations from various industry stakeholders on resiliency in Canada. So I think I think every Canadian should be watching what comes out of that, and what some of the next steps are with the government there. That whole issue is certainly one that needs to be top of mind for us all. And I'll get off my soapbox now. So the next question from Chris and Jeff, maybe this is less of a question than something you and I should go away and take note of, is when I use IPT, it always wants to know my internet package. Even though I checked the box, I'm happy with my information. Don't ask me again.
So yeah, that is a valid point, but maybe I'll just explain why we do that. So when we collect the test data, so each individual test is logged separately. So if Chris were to run multiple tests over multiple days, what we want to do is attribute the information that he's providing, so about the internet package, which is actually with his actual test score. So maybe it's a phrasing thing that we need to change, but we want to match to see if Chris's internet is performing below what the package is. So I don't think the IP that interface will save his answers. It's just going to re-add them every time the test is run. So it is important, but I think, Tanya, you're right. Maybe we just need to change the phrasing on the site itself.
So thank you, Chris. And I don't want to preempt anything Jeff might talk about in the members only section, but we are in the process of planning some upgrades and improvements to the IPT. So input welcome. It's the perfect stage. All right. Sue asks, we use Primus over Bell phone line, who advertise 15 to 50 megabits per second. That's quite a range. Using your test, this is what I'm currently getting: 0.6 megabits upload and 3.3 megabits download.
So I guess that's for me. So first of all, Sue, it would be interesting to know if that's actually what you're experiencing. So do you have like watching this, are we buffering? Are we clipped? Are we glitching? Is the quality low? Are you able to use streaming services? So one key thing, and that I won't take too much time about, our test is what's called an off-network test. So it's running the test from a browser on your device. So it accounts for traffic and congestion on your home network. It accounts for any congestion on the ISP network. And then it goes beyond the ISP network and tests against across the carrier network all the way to internet exchange points. So it's more reflective of real world experience online. So I guess another thing, Sue, that you could do is find another speed test and compare the two results. And I'd be interested to know if you're finding any differences there.
And the other piece, if I can weigh in, we encourage people to run multiple tests throughout the day, because it really is amazing to, maybe it's amazing for those of us here because we nerd out on this stuff a little bit, but it really is amazing, depending on what your connectivity is, what can happen from one moment to the other. We had a little bit of a marital debate at my house about the internet being fine, but it turned out that in the middle of the day it was inconsistent, and I couldn't do video calls consistently because it would just be up and down and all over the place. So so sometimes running multiple, we do have that functionality in the test, and running multiple tests during over the course of a day or a certain time span can be really informative as well, and kind of brings that back to one of the earlier questions of how can you advocate for yourself, how can you better complain, so to speak. Certainly being equipped with information is always helpful.
That's right.
Can I just add a couple of notes to that? I would speak to your ISP for sure. I'll tell you that when customers call with this type of complaint, one thing is to do that test on the modem itself. So you need to be plugged into it so that the Wi-Fi isn't an issue, right? And then you're testing the speed like right there on the connection. If these are the speeds you're consistently getting, that could be a problem. They can get a technician out, and there are lots of factors along there that a technician might be able to change and improve your speeds. We see that kind of thing happen. There are a number of competition issues built into this because Primus is using Bell's lines. It'll be a Bell technician who comes out, and companies like TechSavvy and like Primus are subject to Bell's whims. When a technician comes to connect another person in the neighborhood, they may move you from one port to another port. And so you could see all of a sudden your performance kind of change. We see that type of thing happen. One further note as an illustration, Primus was bought by Distributel, which is another independent competitor last year. Distributel is in the process of being bought by Bell. Now the Competition Bureau is reviewing that. So this is exactly the kind of consolidation that's happening, although I'm not sure consumers are necessarily aware of it when they're with a brand that they have been with for years.
Thank you. Yes, indeed. The understanding the intricacies of who owns who and who's tied to who in the background is just so complex, and most people who don't follow this day in, day out don't necessarily connect those dots, for sure. Bringing us back to, I think, a conversation a little closer to what we were having just before this is Lester's question, which is there any support for the government owning the fiber network like roads rather than having facilities competition? Companies can still compete in the last mile or local network to the home and related services. Any thoughts on that?
This is the kind of solution that you would create if you didn't have the network and you were starting to build it. The real challenge is we already have, these very large companies that have invested billions of dollars. The government has given them billions of dollars to build these networks. I don't know if anybody sees a realistic prospect that the government will nationalize networks that are currently private. There are other ways, though, to get some of the same benefits. And one of that we have not really explored here. And one of them I would say is separation, functional or structural separation. So that is the idea that a company cannot be in the position of both owning the physical infrastructure and selling the retail service on that infrastructure. Instead, you can own the physical infrastructure and sell wholesale services to a large number of providers who offer those services. And we kind of have that wholesale framework in Canada. That's what I was talking about earlier. But at the same time, we're competing against, you know, the giants who also own the networks. And it's never going to be a level playing field until there are you know, guardrails put in to protect smaller providers from those large providers basically abusing their own position owning those networks. So that's kind of the idea of structural or functional separation that has been done in other countries.
Hosein, do you want to jump in here? I know this is
Yes.
right up your alley.
Thank you so much. Certainly, this is a valid approach. How the function separation or service separation is certainly a valid approach, and it has to do really with what kind of legacy infrastructure we have in place, so that the move toward a new paradigm is as painless as possible. But the key premise, in my view, is have competition. Competition is really the best way to enhance customer experience, price point, as well as resiliency of the infrastructure. Competition has to start from the bottom and go up. We have perhaps more competition in the service layer, but we lack competition very strongly in the transit and transport layers. And that's something really that the government has to take a look at on a national level very closely and come up with solutions in the medium to long term. Service separation and is certainly a way to enhance competition in that domain, but still have to make sure that we have competition at the other network layers. I understand investment has been done, but as we can see, it's not enough, or maybe not done the right way that protects the resiliency of the infrastructure and the competition between the different players. So an oversight in this domain is very important. Unfortunately, now we have lack of visibility and lack of transparency, where we don't know how, for example, how the fiber has been fiber maps that have been laid across the country, either from the private sector or from the government, who invests heavily in connecting particularly north to south, but east to west across the country. We have no really visibility what fiber exists, and we suspect we have significant single points of failure that exist in the infrastructure. So there is an oversight is required, where the experts can have a view on what funding is going, and not only going in one direction to make large funds even larger, but actually protect and connect those who are unconnected and allow competition at the different network layers. So an oversight is really something that is very hard, very much needed. And the objective is to provide transparency and visibility and accountability.
Well, thank you. Thanks for that, Hosein. And I'm watching the clock and the number of questions. It's a bit heartbreaking to not get to the many questions, but I think what I will commit Jeff and I to doing is that we'll capture these questions, and we'll find some way to probably communicate back to members and answer at least some of them in the future. And with that, I do want to thank Andy and Hosein. You guys have been amazing. I feel like we have just scratched the surface on this issue. It really, I think connectivity really is something that is so critical right now, and obviously very important to many Canadians. I think, even though the world is reopening up in a, well, I can't say post-pandemic, can I, these days, but as the world is reopening up, there's no going back to where we were at the start of 2020. The internet is where it is and is taking the place that it is in our lives, and digital inequity will just leave some people behind and without access to some critical portions of our day-to-day lives. So hence an important issue. So to our members who are online, don't go anywhere, stay online, and you get to stay on for an AMA with Jeff and I and about CIRA's programs related to infrastructure and the internet performance test. For those of you who are online and who are not members and you don't want to feel left out at the next CIRA event that you attend, we invite you to explore membership at CIRA. All you need to become a member is to be a .ca domain registrant or holder, and after that it's free and super easy to register to become a member. So you can just visit member.cira.ca to learn more about our membership and to sign up. And without further ado, goodbye to those folks who are leaving us, and thanks again to Andy and Hosein.
Thank you very much.